Hey, how's it? I'm Dan. Welcome back to Breathing Underwater's Musicast. This episode was originally intended to be part of my annual roundup of concert-going reflections from throughout the year. But as I was putting that episode together, I realized that I had a significant amount to say about this particular artist, which really ballooned the runtime of that roundup episode to a unmanageable degree. So I thought I would release this one as a more bite-sized standalone episode, which will hopefully make both this episode and the annual concert episode much more accessible. On the otherwise ill-fated date of September 11th, for the first time in almost 20 years, I got the opportunity to see the Deftones again. And I say it like that because, well, as usual, you can hear way more details about my challenges trying to see Deftones in episode 28. But in short, I have now thrice? Yeah, I know that's a band. 3 times been burnt trying to see them in the past 20 years or so. I believe the last time I saw them, I need to go back and listen to my own podcast, but I'm pretty sure the last time I saw them was 2006 or 7 at the Resurrected Family Values tour back then with Korn. And they were still touring for Saturday Night Wrist, and it was the first time, and I think only time, that I ever saw them outside at an amphitheater, and it wasn't my favorite experience with them, just because I don't feel like that kind of venue is appropriate for the kind of music that they make, as opposed to Korn, which you can hear more about on that episode, with their big, rhythmic, groovy, anthemic, fun live show. It worked great, and they totally stole the show. Deftones, to me at least, are a little bit more intimate and contemplative, and yeah, they have some you might call sing-along-ish kind of songs that are catchy, but with their extra flavors of like ambience that Frank Delgado provides and some of the weird chords and sounds that Stefan explores, I just feel like you don't really capture all that atmosphere and vibe in that outdoor, big, more like party festival kind of space with a band like that. So that's why I was like really excited to see them back in the kind of venues that I was used to, starting with, I was living on Maui. They were playing at a club venue on Oahu. I had a contact there, somebody that I was going to stay with, make a little trip out of it, and the whole thing just kind of fell apart from accommodations to travel, and I wasn't able to see, at that point, my favorite band in still what is my favorite place on earth. So that was a huge bummer. And then not too long after, a tour that they were doing with System of a Down, who had just come off of their hiatus back in, again, I need to go check my notes and listen to my old podcast, which is one reason that I do this, to kind of catalog everything and my experiences with this stuff. But I think it was 2012. I was pretty newly relocated to Richmond, Virginia, and they were playing in DC. And because it was Deftones and System, I just assumed it was like a co-headlining kind of situation that obviously had to have opening acts because Deftones wouldn't be the opener for a show, right? So we got there an hour late, or at least an hour after ticket time, which is usually when shows start anyway, at least at that point. That's what I was used to from my experience. And Deftones had just walked off the stage. So that really put a damper on that night and my focus and enjoyment of System. And then Deftones, even though they were touring, I believe, off of Gore, which is by far my least favorite album of theirs, and really started to show me that Deftones had hit their peak in terms of creative songwriting a couple decades before, I was still really excited to see them because I still upheld them as my favorite band. And also, they were touring with Hatebreed, whom I had seen relatively recently before that, which you can hear more about in episode 20. And it was going to be back in the area that I grew up in, Baltimore. Felt a little bit like a homecoming reunion kind of thing. So I was really looking forward to it. And COVID. And since then, they've really blown up, especially on TikTok. And they have this whole new generation of fans that have discovered them and kind of rebranded them as like a heavy shoegaze band or whatever. And even though I disagree with that assessment, I think it's awesome when any band gets the opportunity to have like a resurgence in their popularity and get a chance to spread their music to younger generations. And I'll talk more about that kind of stuff in an upcoming episode because I really want to talk about some positive aspects of the internet and social media, especially when it comes to art, and especially because mostly what we hear these days and experience for a lot of us on the internet is negative. But as all that was going on, they had put out Gore, they put out Ohms, and then very recently they put out Private Music. And as glad as I was for them that they were getting this sort of like second wind to their career, one banal, bland, Deftones sounding album after another really cemented for me that they just aren't my favorite band anymore. They were, but they've lost, to me at least, their creative spark that culminated in some of the most meaningful and powerful, captivating songs and albums for me and my musical journey. And Deftones are one of the bands left over from a time where I was really interested in and followed interviews and other insights into personal lives and personalities of rock stars, something that is just of no interest to me anymore in this point of my life. I really just care about the music and how it makes me feel. But because I still like to read metal news blogs and things just to keep up with albums in the works and tours upcoming and kind of getting the lay of the land for the scene, it was unavoidable to at least peripherally keep up with all of Stefan's apparent mental decline and all of his controversial, to put it lightly, opinions about the state of the world and science and stuff. So between their music output and that kind of stuff, I just felt really detached and kind of ambivalent about them. Just kind of tuned out new stuff from them, new input, and just focused on the pre-existing stuff that I love. I know that makes me sound like an old curmudgeon, and I guess I am in some ways. I like what I like, and I have certain expectations for things based on how things were before. But I promise I have given every album a chance. I've listened to it hoping that even if it wasn't what I wanted or expected from them, that it would at least be interesting and creative and have something to say and make me feel something. And I've just been bored by their last three albums and couldn't help but notice that the cracks have been beginning to show ever since Self-Titled, where Stefan has been playing fewer and fewer riffs, and they've just been phoning it in my opinion, more and more. There's been terrific songs and terrific albums ever since Self-Titled. I love Saturday Night Wrist, even with all its flaws, and I adore Diamond Eyes, but they're not 10 out of 10, no skips, banger after banger kind of albums. They haven't had one of those to me since White Pony. And it's not because they started doing more softer stuff or whatever. It's not because they got more shoegaze, which I think is just a really limited way to try to categorize what they do. So I know that was, as usual, a big long preamble, but in this particular case, I really wanted to give some context to this situation because seeing the Deftones at this point was just not something I'd be interested in, because there are plenty of bands that I've fallen off with that I will gladly see live anytime just because they're fun to see and they put on a good show. Since it's been so long since I've seen the Deftones, and the last time that I saw them wasn't my best experience with them, and because I've been burnt multiple times trying to see them since, I just kind of felt like the writing was on the wall and I needed to listen to what fate was trying to tell me, that my time with keeping up with the Deftones, both with their recorded output but also live shows, was over. But then a friend of mine from all the way back in middle school, whom you can hear guest all the way back in episode 7 of this podcast, where we talk about Deftones and Jonah from Far and that relationship between those artists. Jason offered me a free pit ticket to see Deftones at the CFG Bank Arena in Baltimore, which, even though I have dropped my daughter off at a Billie Eilish show there in the past couple years, I haven't been inside of that place since, I think, seeing Rage Against the Machine in 2000, which you can hear way more about on episode 22. But so going back to the hometown of my middle and high school years with not only a friend from that time and area, but just so happens to be the friend that my brother Dave and I saw the Deftones with the first time in 1998, which again is one of the first shows I discuss on episode 22 because it was one of the first shows that I ever went to, at least rock shows, Weird Al being the first. And then a couple years later, Deftones in DC. They were touring off of Around the Fur, never been to a club show. I think we were all 15-ish, and it was and still remains one of the most memorable experiences of my life. It was so captivating and awe-inspiring and amazing that obviously still to this day, I'm still going to shows and talking about them. So having shared that experience with my brother Dave, whom you've heard on a lot of my stuff, but also reuniting with our friend Jason, whom we saw that show with more than 25 freaking years ago. God, it really did feel like the right time to say yes to the Deftones live again. And I got to say, going into it, based on everything you just heard, I'm sure it's not a surprise, my expectations were really low. They're much older now. And I remember when White Pony had just come out back in 2000, and I saw them a couple times that year after one of their shows that I'm sure I talked about on episode 22, where they played with Incubus and Taproot at, I believe it was the Patriot Center in DC. And then I was at my drum lesson a couple days later at a probably now defunct music store in Baltimore, Maryland called Master Musicians. And one of the guys that was working there, who was a drummer, and the guy that introduced me to like Pro Mark sticks and how to distinguish different kit sounds when it came to recording, because he pointed out to me how immaculate and well mixed Abe's kit was in White Pony. And from that, I just assumed that he was a big Deftones fan, and I think he was recording wise. But even back then, so 25 years ago, I remember him expressing shock to me when I said that they were absolutely incredible at that show the other night. And he was like, really? Because I heard that they're old and slow and losing a step at this point. And I remember even back then thinking like, wow, you know, a band's shelf life is really short. So I was just looking forward to hearing some of my favorite songs live, even if it wasn't the best experience that I've had seeing them live. And more so just having that experience with friends and family and my wife, whom we were supposed to see Deftones together at that show that got canceled because of COVID. So she never got to experience them with me either. I was just looking forward to the more holistic experience. I was not expecting to be blown away or even impressed. Not to sound like a egomaniac, but I think I've made my case about why I felt that way going into this show. And not only that, but my daughter and her boyfriend, whom we saw Blink with a week before, came to this show with us. My brother graciously put us all up for the night at his apartment up in Baltimore. And they came because the boyfriend's favorite band is Deftones. So that right there has got to tell you something about the quality of character of this young man and why I'm so approving of him being part of our family and sharing these experiences with him. So we rolled up to the CFG arena that night, and my wife and I were both wearing Stabbing Westward shirts. It was one of those moments where we were like, aw, babe, but also like, should one of us change? Do we look like we're wearing a uniform? But I mean, it's a metal show. There is a uniform. Black band shirt and jeans. Can't go wrong. So we decided to stick with the Stabbing Westward solidarity. Funnily enough, as we were walking into the venue, we saw another couple wearing Stabbing Westward shirts or hoodies. And we were like, hey, hey. And then we talked for a second because they got their merch just like we did at the past couple Stabbing Westward shows in the area that you can hear more about in the past couple episodes that I did about concert reflections the past couple years. So that was funny and cute. And by the time we got there, because we were driving up from DC where we had stopped earlier in the day, and our friend Jason was driving up from Northern Virginia, so traffic was an issue, and we all met at Dave's apartment and then carpooled over together. So we missed the first band, which apparently was the Barbarians of California, so I have nothing to report on them. Idols was playing when we got there. Really didn't quite know what to make of or didn't dig what I was hearing. But most of the time that Idols was on stage, I was in the merch line or getting food. So again, I'm not going to judge what I kind of heard peripherally from another room. But people seem to like them. Unsurprisingly, but still always happy to see, is that there were a lot of younger people there. But in this case, unlike a lot of the millennial band shows that I've been going to that you've been hearing about on my recent podcasts about all the shows that I go to, where you can tell that it's a family, that kids are going with their parents, even if the kids are fans too. It's kind of a family affair. But there were a lot of teenagers and 20-somethings there, a lot of Gen Zers, which I knew were the ones giving the Deftones their big resurgence right now because of TikTok and stuff. But one thing that we've seen with TikTok trends is that they don't always translate to real life. There's been plenty of artists that blew up on TikTok and then tried to go out on the road and didn't have the ticket sales and had to cancel tours. So it was really cool to see that I'd say maybe a quarter of the crowd was younger skewing. And that was awesome because as much as I love seeing a lot of these bands from my youth, it is a little sobering, I guess is the word, going to shows where it's mostly people my age or older, like Pantera, for instance, and not seeing the kind of new blood, realizing that it's mostly nostalgia at this point and there's not really forward momentum. It is what it is, you know, things come and go, people age, things change, but sometimes it can be difficult to contend with that reality. But experiences like this give me hope that there is still a place for things no matter what time it's from. Good art is good art. And if it's made with dedication and honesty, that it has the potential to be timeless. Time will tell on all this millennial stuff that's so nostalgic right now, if it's going to stand the test of time beyond current day nostalgia, but we'll see. Speaking of the youth, though, I was really glad to see, and I've just been so happy to see such a resurgence of 90s and early 2000 aesthetics, fashion and otherwise. There was like a lot of kind of e-girl, gothy, fishnets, dark makeup, plaid skirts, boots, but also, as I'm sure you've seen out there, things like skate apparel, baggy shirts, Jinkos, skate shoes. These things are huge right now again. Even my own teenage son is basically dressing more or less like I did when I was his age, which is just so gratifying. I can't tell you. I don't know if it's annoying to some parents or kind of like passé or funny. But again, and I'll talk more about this in a future episode about the positive side of the internet and art. But I think it's really cool that it's not purely a projected nostalgia for kids to be exploring this kind of counterculture or I guess mainstream culture stuff, but it's actually like an authentic part of their identity exploration and their generation's culture. It's pulling from a lot of different stuff, and it's validating to know that it wasn't just a flash in the pan, that there was something to it, even if it is just surface aesthetics, still says something. And for me, it just felt very comfortable because it felt like going to a nu metal show in the late 90s, early 2000s. So if all of the aspects, like going with my brother and Jason again in the Baltimore, DC area and all that stuff wasn't enough to convey like how fateful this particular show was for all of us, the fact that the Deftones open with Be Quiet and Drive just like they did in 1998 at the Capitol Ballroom, which was my first exposure to the mind-bending joy of a live rock show experience. I could tell from that moment when they first hit whatever weird chord that Stefan plays to open Be Quiet and Drive, that it was going to be special. And it primed me to drop all of my expectations for things to be tolerable. And I was just ready for a good time. And they freaking delivered. I can't believe how wrong I was about, even after all this time, talking decades here. They brought it so hard, especially Chino. But all of them were up there just having a great time. You could tell. I mean, Chino kept saying like how much fun he was having. And you could tell from his body language and his energy and his little inflections and his little woos and stuff. He was jumping around and laughing. And that just enhanced the whole thing even more than the fact that they sounded incredible. So big and thick with the guitars. Now, I don't know who the bass player is at this point, and that was another thing I forgot to mention earlier that burnt me a little bit on them was the way that everything went down with, I forget his name now, but the bass player that they took on after Chi was in his accident, and he became not just like a touring bassist for hire, but he was part of the band. He was part of their promotional stuff. He wrote albums with them. And he was an old friend. That was another Deftones show that I missed way back in the day. I think it was like 99, 2000. It might have been after White Pony came out. I don't remember exactly now, but there was some venue in the Baltimore area a lot closer to where I lived than Baltimore proper, and especially DC, which was where all the main national touring acts went through at that time before Baltimore was the destination that it is now, apparently. I think it was called Michael's 8th Avenue. And I don't remember why, but for some reason I didn't go to that show. I know that Jason, that was at this show, went to it, and some other people that I knew. So it wasn't like it was inaccessible to me or something. I don't know what happened. I really can't remember, but I remember being super disappointed when I heard how amazing it was. And Quicksand opened for them, which that bassist had been or is in Quicksand. So I knew that they were old friends. So when I heard about how things went down, at least from the outside, it seemed pretty, I don't know, corporate. And you never know how these things really go down. All this stuff with like Slipknot. We never know what's really going on with the dynamics behind the scenes and everything. But from how it sounded pretty impersonal. And I just gave me the impression that the Tones were all about business at that point, and that didn't bode well for, how I felt about their dedication to the art, because a big part of the art when it comes to a band is the collaborative relationships that you have with your bandmates, for better or for worse. But regardless, new bassist was great, and they also had a backup instrumentalist. He played guitar and some bass. I wasn't expecting that because they'd always just been that 5-piece ever since I took on Frank for White Pony moving forward. But I guess that really helped fill out the sound. But even with that, Chino would play guitar sometimes too, as he has been known to do. So they had a big wall of sound, and it was amazing. They had a great visual thing going on, stuff on screens, very kind of like Nine Inch Nails-y, weird random imagery and stuff. And between their stage presence and how good they sounded, it really enhanced how their newer songs sounded to me too. And I have tried to go back and listen to some of that stuff from Gore forward since I saw this show, and it still doesn't do anything for me. But at the show, it all sounded great, and it had an energy that was coming from the live performance that made those songs work for me in that context. But then the other half of the energy that was working both for me and apparently for the band too was the energy of the crowd. And like you've been hearing me say a lot, if you've listened to any of these other Concert Reflection episodes, it's been a little disappointing going to these millennial nostalgia shows with mostly millennials in attendance and just seeing the energy level from the crowd being really low, just a lot of like standing there with your arms folded, nodding your head kind of stuff. Or like I've seen, because I've been to a lot of amphitheater shows and lawn shows and stuff, where people don't even stand up, even for like the headliners. To each their own, I get it. I used to not understand why my brother, for instance, would want to spend a lot of the show up in the balcony, like at 930 Club when we were growing up, instead of down on the floor in the pit crowd area where everybody was undulating and moving around and really getting to like physically express their enjoyment of the music. But not everybody experiences things the same way I do, and I learned that early on, and I respect that. But just in general, I've just found that even when there's the opportunity to be a little bit more physical, and I'm not talking just about like moshing. Moshing is what it is, but it's a little bit more, I don't know, calculated and intentional than just experiencing the music with your body as much as your ears. And that's why I always loved growing up going to shows, not moshing, but just being in the crowd where you're like slammed forward and you're just kind of like I said, undulating, and there's like this pulsing movement in a sea of people. But now it seems, at least in this generation, everybody wants to kind of keep their distance, which I totally get and understand. I have a bubble too. And just kind of stand there and watch the show. But that does have an effect on the general energy of the show. But I'm assuming because there were so many young people there, that there was that undulation, that rhythmic kind of primal, when it was like a chuggy, bouncy part, you could see most people on the floor ahead of me, because my brother and Jason and me and my wife and everybody we were with were doing exactly what I was just complaining about. We were kind of keeping our distance from other people in the back of the floor and just sort of headbanging and jumping up and down in our own space, which is just where I'm at right now. And again, I don't decry anybody for wanting to experience things their own way and what they're comfortable with. I'm just talking more about the general energy when there's that like collective physical reaction to music that enhances the experience for me, even if I'm not the one doing it. It's just nice to see when people collectively are enjoying something and are all participating. And this crowd really was. They were jumping up and down and moshing and crowd surfing. It really did feel like going to a new metal show in 2001. It was so much fun. As expected, they played a good overview of stuff from most of their catalog. Surprisingly, they played a lot from Around the Fur, even Around the Fur, which I wasn't expecting. I knew they'd play My Own Summer, and like I said, they opened with Be Quiet and Drive. But they even played Head Up, and that was just phenomenal. But they didn't play as much off of White Pony as I would have expected. And if I recall, they didn't play anything off of their self-titled, and they saved most of the Adrenaline tracks for the end, which wasn't surprising, but they played more off of Adrenaline than I expected. I thought they'd maybe just play like 7 Words or Engine Number 9 and like that's it. But they played several. But yeah, I can't express enough how special this show was, from the people that I went with to the positivity and participation from the crowd to the band and how great they were and how great they sounded. It really all just came together, and I was so gratified to be proven wrong about my grumpy old man expectations for this show that, like Jack Black said in School of Rock,
one great rock show can change the world.
And this one did for me, because it reminded me about why I love this band in the first place, how great they are for not just their recorded output, but for what they are, what they created, who they've inspired, and also why I love live music and why live music is so important. Just like the first time that I saw them almost 30 years ago, this is a completely unforgettable experience that I'll treasure for the rest of my life. So thank you, Jason, for the ticket.
I've been Dan. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you listening to this. You can find me and all the ways to contact me, follow me, and yell at me about all the things that I'm wrong about at breathingunderwater.us. And in lieu of playing an actual song like I generally do at the end of my Musicast episodes, because from the beginning of me doing this, it just didn't make sense to me to have a podcast talking about music and not playing music. But in this case, since this was mostly focused on a live show, I thought I'd use this opportunity to expand a little bit on what I do when I go to concerts, in addition to making audio podcasts about them, which is make highlight reels or shorts that I post on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/breathingunderwater, and my Instagram at breathingunderwater1, all of which you can find at breathingunderwater.us, plus all the different ways to follow and contact me and yell at me about all the things that I'm wrong about. But YouTube especially is obnoxious because of the copyright stuff. Even if it's a live show, a lot of times if I do a short that's longer than a minute and YouTube flags it as having copyrighted material, it'll get blocked. So I have to keep it under a minute a lot of times, even if I have a lot more footage that I'd like to make a highlight of. And when that's the case, I do post those on TikTok, which is at breathingdakine, DAKINE. But I'm not a big fan of TikTok. I just post there because it's just one extra way to get myself out there. But I prefer to focus on YouTube personally. It's just the millennial in me, I guess. But anyway, point being, I thought I'd use this opportunity to play a little bit more clips from this show. Obviously, taken with my phone, so they're not the highest quality, but hey, that's what most of us are used to watching on YouTube anyway. So I hope you enjoy an expanded highlight montage of some of the songs that were played at the show that I just talked about.